Go for it, Ian.
Hello, everyone. Just before I begin, I'd like to give a content warning. I'm going to be talking about death and disease and cancer. And I'd just like to give a moment right now for anyone to leave the room. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Ian Cooper Adler, and I'm here to present my stool called Yip. What does Yip mean? Yip was a gibberish word that my mother and I used to say to each other that meant something to the effect of hello, I see you, or I love you. It was kind of like our namaste in a way. But why is it the name of my stool? In my first semester at Parsons, I was given 2 weeks to create a stool, pictured here. I was then given 2 weeks to create a piece of flat pack furniture. There, also that stool on the table. I then brought that stool to a trade show, the one in the middle, it's me. But then 2 months later, unfortunately, my mother's cancer treatments stopped, and she was moved to her nursing home to receive hospice care at the end of her life. When visiting her, as you can see, there was nowhere to sit. We spent a lot of time hovering over her bed, sitting on that radiator, or trying to find some space on the corner of the bed just to get close to her. I had the thought, why not bring the stool that I'd created, that she was proud of me for creating, for bringing to the trade show, into the space. But I left the stool at home. Why? The stool was too loose, it was too small, it was very hard to move and heavy. I left the edges unfinished, it was uncleanable, unhygienic. I was really worried about my family hurting themselves on it, and I thought it would just be a tripping hazard. It was made very quickly to be ready to go to the trade show and just would not have worked in this space, so I left it. But in the end, my mother and I were still able to find joy, and we created this painting together. This is an image of her and our dog overlooking a sunset that she wanted, and I had her telling me what different colors she wanted in the background, and it was one of the most special moments. My mother died peacefully, probably thinking about Bermuda. So what did I do? I first had to let myself process my grief, and I had to learn to let other people help me. Like my girlfriend who made this image of us gathering around my mother. After some time, I learned everything I could about death and dying in the United States. For example, 71% of people in the United States as of 2015 died outside of their homes, despite most people wishing to die within their homes. This doesn't add up. I also learned a bit of the history of death and dying in the United States, and this is just an abridged version. Starting from the Civil War, where the funeral industry emerges, embalming emerges as a practice. Lincoln's body, after he's assassinated, is actually moved around the country for everyone to see. And this is a moment where death itself is moved outside of the home, where it had previously been something that occurred in the home, in the community with the family. Moving on to the early 1900s, the influenza pandemic and other pandemics start in recent memory, starting associating death itself with contagious disease. So it made sense for the dying to be separated out in quarantine when they were dying because they were infectious. Moving on to the 70s, the hospice movement emerges, which is really this idea that the end of life should be given special attention, that the people that are dying should not just be left to die, and that we should think about ways of reducing pain, making them feel more comfortable. Moving on to the 80s, palliative care emerges, which is about just removing pain. But also I need to mention here all the activism that was necessitated by the AIDS Act, the AIDS crisis, where people were left to fend for themselves because coroners and funeral workers refused to even interact with the dead bodies of victims of AIDS. And a lot of grassroots community work had to happen to memorialize these people and care for the body afterwards. Moving on to the 90s, we start to see the home funeral movement and the green burial movements. which I see is emerging obviously from that activism and earlier activism, but death is now coming home, back home again, becoming more natural, becoming not separated as much. And then now on to the 2010s and where we are currently, where there's the emergence of death doulas, which are similar to doulas for birth, but they instead accompany a person who's transitioning at the end of their life. I studied medical furniture guidelines, which are incredibly stringent. This is just a little snippet of a 100+ page document I flipped through. So these guidelines talk about affordability, they talk about it being easy to clean, they talk about things being lightweight, easily movable, having non-porous and unsealed to prevent infection, having no seams, disinfectable, inflammable, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of red tape. Everyone knows this. It's really hard to get into the medical space. What I found to be distinctly missing from any of these guidelines was anything that was human. There was absolutely nothing about the furnishings being comforting, being aesthetically beautiful, warm, inviting, or grounding. And that's where I sought to come in. So I first designed everything but a stool. As you see up there, I started with these bean blobby shapes where two bodies could be together and you could choose different positions to be next to that person and be close to them. I then went on to thinking about how I could create attachments for the side of the bed so you could stay close and at the right same level as the person that's in the bed. To then explorations of everything but hydraulic chair mechanisms for raising and lowering heights, as those felt too institutional to me and like equipment. I then came to my midterm where I became very, very fixated on the idea of having this frame with a seat that could be slotted up and down. And when I showed this, it became very, very clear that for one thing, it was way too large, it was way too cumbersome, that plywood seat was very, very heavy and hard to use, and it was just not meeting what I'd set out to do. And in conversation with my classmates and in my faculty, I came to the realization that since I'd already returned to the very room that my mother had died in, which is actually this image, and this is an image of the hallway, why not redesign the stool that I left behind? I started by thinking about attachments to the stool to make it more comfortable, to just simply having different height bases, that you could be at different heights, to different ways of maybe perhaps involving stacking cushions to achieve that different height. I then went on to reconsidering the seat itself. At first it was only 12 inches, I expanded it to 14 inches, to then 16 inches, which is more of a standard chair width, so it could accommodate the average person. I then added these handles to it to make it easier to move around, but it also offered an affordance in an area to brace oneself in these very difficult times. Now the body itself started, to me at least, to look incongruous with the top that I've created. So I spent a lot of time carefully considering the outer profile that I gave the stool and thinking about different forms and how it would look from a 360-degree point of view like a sculptor would. I also in this time considered light weighting the stool, removing material from it in specific areas. I tested the stool, it's the one that, and there at the cushion, it's that one. So this one was very lightweight, but when you sat on it, and you could try it in a little bit, it was very wobbly and wiggly, and it was not trustworthy and comfortable. And also you would feel the material I removed there on your butt when you sat on it, which is not great. I then improved my prototype to this one. I tested it, excuse me. I tested it with some different people. So these are two of the Zen Buddhist priests at the New York City Zen Center for Contemplative Care, been helping me, guiding me throughout this work. That's my twin sister and my father and my grandfather at the very end there, who I was mainly worried about hurting himself on. And he was actually able to get off and on the stool unassisted, which I found to be amazing. This is a video of, if it'll play, one of the doulas assembling it in real time. I had around 8 or 7 doulas testing it at the Zen Center. It was an incredible visit. I set my stole to be professionally manufactured, which is one you see right here. Thank you, Andrew, for the picture. It's made out of UV-coated plywood, which can be cleaned with Clorox wipes or bleach, which is critical to the medical environment. The cushion I have there, it's a polyester nylon blend with memory foam. It has rubber on the back to prevent from slipping. I did not make the cushion. I will specify that right now. Focus on the stool. I considered a system in which my stool might work. So I came up with these 5 words where there's the transportation where a person is moved to a medical facility or a nursing home to receive hospice care. There's then a consultation, well, there always is a consultation with a hospice agent or palliative care professional. Sometimes there will be a death doula, and where I'm thinking that there could also be a death doula hybrid designer there as well, who can then make the appropriate amount or bring the appropriate amount of stools at the right height, at the right dimensions, since the design is parametrized, for the family. After the individual dies, the stools can then be returned and cleaned and then stored for the next family. Something like this. This is really the main point I want to send home to everyone right now, is that my whole perspective on what care is was fundamentally changed throughout this process and what the end of life looks like and my own views on it. But really that caring is a creative act. It takes creativity to truly be caring. And we as creative people, as creative professionals, can use our creativity to enhance care. We can do better and we can die better. We can go from the all too familiar scene of this to something that looks a little bit more like this. Yeah, thank you. I also invite you to test out the stools. Yes.
So first of all, I wanted to commend you for this presentation. You talked about a subject that a lot probably would be able to do, so really good job for that. And throughout your design process, you spoke to a lot of different design professionals, and they really helped you along the way. I was wondering if you could go into more depth about that.
Oh, sure. So, sorry. I have my dream team here. I met with different furniture designers, artists, death doula / designers, which is an interesting overlap, which I've seen found. The nurses, the former head of nursing at the very facility that my mother was at, I had a chance to meet with, and some of our wonderful faculty who are here right now. Yes.
I really admire the sentimental value that this school symbolizes, because it will go on. For you, it started it got triggered by your mother's death, and may she rest in peace. But maybe for other people, it will also be some sort of comfort. And how do you plan on introducing it after talking with all these experts? How do you plan on taking this chair and pitch kind of this idea to them and like test it, or
yeah.
How do you plan on doing that?
So I have not been able to bring this into a hospital or have it actually used by death doulas or other professionals like that yet. And that is the first thing that I want to have done as soon as possible, to see how this actually behaves in the context in which it's been designed for. And I'm already in touch with, I don't know the number now, death doulas who are interested in it, and I think I'm going to donate one of them to, or a few of them, to their center with the stipulation that they have to use it and they have to tell me how that goes.
Amazing. I highly encourage that.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, you were talking about the medical guidelines, and I apologize if this is a question, but I understand I wonder if the requirements are different for hospices versus hospitals, because with hospices, the people are dying.
Mhm.
I know, for example, in hospices, sometimes, they allow people in hospice to like drink alcohol or do other things that are not good for them, but they are dying anyway, so maybe having something that is like perfectly sanitary isn't as much of an issue, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so something else I want to clarify is that these are brought into the space. These are not designed to be existing in the space, and that another point there is that I think only 3% of people in the United States actually die in a true hospice facility. The vast majority are in like a normal hospital or like a nursing home, which they have those guidelines, but because this is brought in, it doesn't need to check every single box. I wanted to get it as close as possible to being medically compliant. Yeah.
There was something, for me anyway, emotionally, when I saw this image that just clicked, the whole concept sort of clicked together, because it's, the way that I was perceiving this image is that the project is not really a piece of furniture per se, it's a scaffold in which this can happen, right? That this gathering, this really
Yes.
important emotional gathering can happen. And so can you perhaps speak a little bit about how much do you want the design of this piece of furniture to disappear, in terms of it's there to support those in the room, and that what's happening is the important thing, and that this is really should almost be like not thought about, versus the idea of something like a ceremonial stool, in which the stool is there as a pedestal for, let's say, a passage, a coronation or something like that. Like
Yeah.
a ceremonial stool. Is it do you imagine it as the sort of active focus of the event that's happening, or is it something that is designed to, if successful, fade into the background and disappear, or something in between?
That's been a debate the whole time throughout it. I think that I see a lot of value. I saw it earlier on in creating this seat of honor, or what John Bruce faculty I was also working with would call a space for caring bodies to surround a body in need of care, and to create that space as something very special and distinct and different looking is very nice. Distinct from medical equipment. There is also the value though in that the whole thing is about that interaction really though. Fundamentally it's about people feeling comfortable enough when they're visiting that person who they're saying goodbye to, that they can maybe make a painting together like I was able to do with my mother, or think about other ways in which they spent time with that being, with that person, that were joyous and happy, to open up into this more expansive vision of what the end of the life of that person could look like. That it could be something that's very much about connecting. It will still be hard, it will still be intense and sad, but there's opportunities for even joy in these moments.
Yeah, this was a beautiful presentation. Thank you for sharing all this with us. I think the product is beautiful. I would have loved to see some renders of whenever nighttime comes and people can't stay over. I'd like to have seen them folded on the corner. Can they leave these tools behind in this space where they're not inconvenient to the people that are providing care? Or will it be easy to transport to a car and keep it in the back of a car to bring in every couple of days when you're there with your loved one? So that part I would have liked to see a little more. But it's a great product. Yeah.
Thank you.
I know that you said the material is wipeable, so you clearly thought about this specific material. And I wonder, is there a specific reason it's wood versus something that could be lighter, like aluminum or something like that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, a big part of this was, while maybe the warmth of wood is something symbolic and not real, it still emotionally has an impact on people. Everything else in the medical room is mainly steel and aluminum and that gray putty plastic, and I wanted to create something that had a different feeling to it, and the only way I could do that was through wood.
So
I mean, I think the second criteria set that you wrote is really great, and I think if you were to show those criteria, one would have to work with a psychologist and have evidential work to prove that that was important to the costing that the hospital put forward. So, but I think that's a strong. I think, you know, designers do a lot of quasi work, like we do quasi ethnography and quasi, and then that helps to direct. So, but that would be the next steps. Like as a designer, we can't just create our own list and have that happen. But I think you're making the right steps as a designer. So I really like what you've done. Is the circular part the drop from the curve at the bottom? Does it fit?
It nearly does. The original one.
In the original one, it did fit.
Yes, the original one it nested.
Because I think that you might be too rigorous in the design. Like I could imagine you working to make it fit. And actually, this is a situation where you want to make a knockdown piece of furniture, and maybe it shouldn't all be made out of plywood. So if it's really about elevating it, I would consider making some of the structure plywood, some out of solid wood, and then coming up with a detail that's really robust that you can take apart. But I wouldn't do sort of like problem solving to make it all out of plywood because you can make it all out of plywood. Like that might not, I mean, it's a really great thing to do as an exercise.
Yeah.
But if it's really about, if your thesis is about creating a human experience in an institutional environment, let that drive the design. So that's something, I think as designers we often solve problems that no one else cares about, but a designer likes to make it all out of plywood. But I think you can make it in a very ecological way with very little drop from the material, but still make it out of wood. But I think using some solid wood in it would make sense.
Yeah, I would love to try one with solid wood.
I mean, hospitals spend a lot of money on furniture. Like you might think that it's like really a cheap environment, but they have like Moroso waiting chairs, and you know, it's not that they don't have a budget. They have to show how their budget is like the criteria. So that would also be a step if you were to move forward. Is it would have to be a longer research project to show that this has a return for them.
I was really touched by the fact that it was one thing you said that was really short, and it was about the handles and about how it was for like bracing yourself, which we look at, I see as like, oh, for carrying it, right? But I love the idea that you're reinforcing the idea that this thing is carrying me, right? And that you can kind of hold on to it. And so I think with what we're saying, if that material inside where you grip it, if there's something that's almost makes it a mindful act where you're reassured in that, you know, kind of grabbing those handles. There's something really nice about that you mentioned very briefly, and so I don't know how much of a driver that was, but it stuck with me for sure.
Yeah, thank you. No, it was a mix of it. It was initially, I'll admit and I'll say, about carrying it, but that became very apparent that it also was kind of like the handle in the car. It's like the the oh shit handle. It's, you know, it's like one of the hardest things to experience, right? And you want to feel like you're there or like hold on to something. It makes a difference.
I agree. I thought that was really beautiful and it struck me too. And if there's ways to bring that back, bring that thinking further into your design, and maybe that sort of melds with Rama's point, I think it's really going to show.
Yeah.
Because you walk into these hospital rooms and there really is nowhere to sit. There's sort of this awkward dance.
Yeah.
And having that invitation and that understanding, having it be like really like knowing how to enter, knowing where to go to get the chair, or you know, how to sort of without having to ask. You know, it's such an awkward thing. So really considering that throughout your design, I think would be beautiful.
Was it intentional to be cathedral-like in the negative space and the cross and all of that? I mean, was that, no? No,
that wasn't intentional. That was, so my family's Jewish, so that has nothing to do with our background.
Well, synagogues have cupolas. And
they do. I do.
Mosques and like.
I do recognize it does have a bit of that form in it. That was really mainly to have it be structurally strong enough and lightweight enough to still support a person's weight. But
I think you're missing an opportunity if that's the more music, because it's a really, so I thought what I like about the knockdown quality is you're passing time, and it's not necessarily about efficiency and getting the chair out easily, but it's actually like these awkward moments and like, oh, what are you doing? Or someone thinking, and it's like getting your mind off it. And I think that's really something that's quite powerful. It's like you're sending to so I would, as you develop it, I would actually think of the negative space and what that experience is like.
That you start packing up the chair and so saying, all right, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
You know, there's sort of, it helps fill that space.
I just want to applaud you for taking on a personal issue, personal experience, and in some ways I see the chair and the designs working through your own memory and your own loss, and presenting it in a way that becomes transformative to a creative act, and also focusing upon the last memory of anyone that passes you as not just a residual space, but something you want to transform, because it's becomes something that you hold as memory. And so I think Rama's comments about what its aesthetics are that you introduced in the project can even be amplified further. But there's a tension inevitably in your project between the functional reading of it, like how do you carry it, how do you take it down, how long does it take, and its capacity to hold memory and hold body, which may require a little bit more mass. There's that inherent tension between the efficiency and the light way and its comportment for composure that may actually produce more of a tension. I think you cited on the I think intentionally on the idea of making it lightweight, demountable. It can quickly set up rooms, and so it's the staging of it. But I think the other part that you're arguing is that these devices need to be more substantial, need to be more present, because our presence in these moments, substantiated by the kind of crap furniture that are often in these hotel and hospital rooms or hospice rooms, aren't conducive to the symbolic value of that memory. And I think that tension is inherent in the language you're thinking about how one designs for this end.
Thank you. And is that it?
Yes.
And that's also the door.
Thank you.